And we are live. Okay, thanks everybody for joining. We have a very special guest tonight on the show, which is outside of the immediate scope of what we usually cover, T. Matthew Phillips and I, but a very, very famous personality, Bart Sibrel. Thank you very much for joining. Really
Sure,
appreciate you back
Roman,
here.
Matthew, how are you two doing?
We are very, very, very excellent, excellent. I see that people are already joining. So again, the show is being transmitted in parallel on Facebook and in YouTube. We try to make it interactive, so people will probably post comments, and you might have a critical audience because that's not, the typical topic that we usually cover. But Matthew and I, we understand where it all ties in because we primarily cover the government hoax in family court, and that's a very, very interesting topic. That these worlds are kind of parallel, not always combining, but they need to be combined because people need to start understanding the modus operandi of so many government institutions behind the scenes. So, Mr. Sibrel, thank you very much for joining again. I know that you not a long time ago you were on Joe Rogan, right? So it's a pleasure to be in the same league. How are you,
I'm doing good. How about you two?
Matthew?
Beautiful.
I'm going to adjust my
Beautiful. I
light
just want to
here.
say thank you.
There we go.
We're so happy to have Bart come out. I had a little prepared introduction for the audience. He's a filmmaker, a historian, a groundbreaker. I'm just kind of ad-libbing right now. Also, he's responsible for the movies A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, which is a terrific movie. You got to see it. And also Astronauts Gone Wild. I own both of those movies on DVD, and they're fantastic. Again, Astronauts Gone Wild, and also A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. Ladies and gentlemen, Bart Sibrel.
Hey there. Sorry, adjusting my lighting. I have things on dimmers, and when there's a power dip, we've had a storm. Lights go up and down. I got to adjust them there. But I'm doing okay. How about you two, Matthew and Roman?
Very
Very
good, very
well,
good.
thank you.
Yes.
And we're wondering, and maybe Roman wanted to begin the questioning. Today, our topic is kind of a sensitive one. It's the whole thing about the moon landing and the issues surrounding the moon landing and government deception or NASA-based deception. And Roman, I know you had some questions for our guest, our illustrious guest. So fire away, and this should be lots of fun.
I have a lot of questions actually, and that's it's again, we would like to, from the perspective of the audience that we accumulated here, and we were blessed with the many people actually, some clips come to thousands of views, and hopefully more. I think this stream will be extremely popular eventually once people get exposed to that. But I was born in the Soviet Union, and I remember as a kid, I remember the post, office. Pictures and cards and like little marks that celebrated the Soviet landing, and you always see the vector sign. Um, but the whole notion, right, of the research that you've been leading for the last 20 years more, right, if I'm not mistaken. Uh, to those who are not yet initiated into the topic, what are the things that brought you into the research, and what stands out to you? How would you introduce the topic, to those who are not familiar with that? What made you question the government narrative?
Well, I think it was Matthew before we began recording or live stream said something really interesting, and I'll add part two to what he said. He said that of all the government lies, the moon landing fraud is the easiest to prove, or maybe he said the easiest to understand. And I would also add a paradox. It's also the most difficult at the same time. Let me explain why. The fact is, today, with 50 years, better rockets and computers, the farthest that NASA can send an astronaut into space is 1,000th the distance to the moon. You see?
Mhm.
So back in 1969, all of NASA's computers combined had 1 millionth the power of a cell phone, computing power. So with 1 millionth the computing power of a cell phone, they went 1,000 times farther with untried 1960s technology than they can do today with 50 years better rockets and computers. So their claim is that the 1960s is greater technology than what we have today, because otherwise there would be bases on the moon. And if we could drive cars and play golf on the moon with 1960s technology, we would have been on Mars 10 years later. We'd be in another solar system by now, because just 10 years after they blew up the first atomic bombs were 1,000 times more powerful. You see, technology does not go backwards. It's impossible scientifically and historically to have 1,000 times greater space traveling capability in 1969 than today. So we just proved with logic that the moon missions were fake. That should be simple. Here's the part why it's hard. Okay, everyone disputes who shot JFK to a large degree. A survey said that 75% of Americans believe that Oswald did not kill Kennedy. And my book, if you go to Sibrel.com, the book about the moon landing fraud, has 17 interactive video links. I basically write a chapter and then I say, look, if you want to understand the next chapter, take a break, go to Sibrel.com, click on link 1, link 2. One of the links, I'm not sure which number, is of Dan Rather, I think 2 days after the Kennedy assassination, describing for the public the Zapruder film, which they refused to show. You understand that? The Zapruder film was not broadcast to Americans until 12 years after the assassination. Okay. But Dan Rather said, trust me, let me describe it for you. Well, the click link at Sibrel.com, one of the links of Moon Man, is a synchronized version of Dan Rather's description with the real footage. And one of the things he says is, and the third fatal shot, you can see Kennedy's head go violently forward, exactly when his head goes violently backwards. So CBS Evening News is reporting exactly the exact opposite of the truth, you see, because that means the shooter was in the front, not in the back, but they claimed it was in the back. So it doesn't matter who killed Kennedy. To the degree that he was killed is the tragedy. Arguing over who did it is just simply changing hats and changing why, but it's still a tragedy. Or 9/11. We have 3,000 architects and engineers who have risked their lifelong reputations and their livelihoods, their income, right? By testifying with the signature that's notarized that it's mechanically impossible for a pinhole airplane to go in and out of a steel grid to cause its collapse. All you got to do is look at the Oklahoma City bombing photograph. Half the building was blown away, and the thing stood as a grid, powerful. So a pinhole going in and out isn't going to cause its collapse. Nevertheless, it still is a tragedy. There's 3,000 people dead, regardless of who did it or why they did it. The moon landing fraud is different. This is why it really is, and we can talk about the second, third, and fourth incontrovertible proof that they didn't go. So it really is, from a logical courtroom point of view, super easy to prove that they faked the moon landing. The obstacle, the reason why it's paradoxically the most difficult, is unlike who killed JFK, it's still a tragedy. Unlike who did 9/11, it's still a tragedy. The moon landing fraud is a positive lie. You see, it's a positive fraud. People wanted to believe that America could put a man on the moon. Nixon, who was president at the time, said the number one threat to the United States of America is not China, it's not Russia, it's Americans who are protesting the federal government. So during the Vietnam War, which had all these protests, they gave them a pep rally. They gave them a guarantee of something to cheer about. You can guarantee the success of the moon mission if you falsify it. then you have no problem whatsoever going to the moon and back. There's no risk to the astronauts. And that's why when we discovered the code name that Johnson gave it, it was called Slam Dunk because it's easy. You can
Yes.
guarantee a successful
Yes.
moon mission if you fake it. So they called it Slam Dunk. So it is easy to prove that they did not go to the moon from a factual point of view. It's difficult to prove because people don't want to give up the sweet candy of the glory of science, the glory of patriotism, the glory of putting a man on the moon. And you realize there's actually only three eyewitnesses. You know what I mean? I mean, who knows what's really going on the moon? There's no way to prove it or disprove it. Every source of media was from the corrupt federal government. All the photographs, all the TV transmissions. People don't remember this. There were no live pictures during the landing on the moon. Now, we heard the audio while they were allegedly landing on the moon. So, radio waves can contain audio or video. So, why not have video? Why not put a camera on the side of the lunar module for the entire mission as the moon gets bigger and bigger and bigger and then goes down all the way down? Because they weren't there. You see, they deliberately chose not to have live pictures. They had live audio, they had cameras on board. They could have easily had a live picture tagged on to the radio signal, you see? So the first
Yeah.
proof that they didn't go is you cannot have greater technology in the past and the future. It's over. It's never happened in the history of the world. That's like Lindbergh flying across the Atlantic in 1927, and 55 years later, no one can fly an airplane over the Atlantic when there's
Right.
747s and millions of aircraft flying over the Atlantic. Or someone blowing up the first atomic bomb in 1945, and 55 years later, we just somehow can't do it again. No, that's not the case. Even Columbus going to America, just a few years later, people were going to America. There's never been a technological breakthrough, splitting the atom, breaking the sound barrier, flying over the Atlantic, that no nation on earth could repeat 55 years later. It's never happened except going to the moon. So the second proof, if I may ramble on, go to Sibrel.com. There's a
Yes.
3-minute video. You can prove it from a photograph that they faked the moon missions. We have a photograph on the homepage of Sibrel.com. Go outside on a bright sunny day with no clouds. Look at two trees, two telephone poles, two people standing in the front yard or the parking lot of your business at work. Look at the shadows of the two people or the two trees or the two telephone poles. They run parallel because the sun is a million times bigger than the earth. It's going to cast shadows in the same direction over the entire earth or moon. Shadows from sunlight are always parallel. It's impossible scientifically for them to intersect with one another. We show a picture from Apollo
Yeah.
17 where the astronaut shadow is at 12 o'clock and a rock 5 feet away is at 9 o'clock. 90-degree difference from shadows from objects 5 feet apart. Now, I'm a filmmaker. My job is to make fake scenes look real. That was shot with electrical light. It's over. You can prove the moon missions are fake from that one photograph. And then I found classified footage of them faking being halfway to the moon right in front of your eyes with a 1 foot model pretending it's the Earth in space, with a third track of audio from the CIA telling them to fake a 3 second or 4 second radio delay. And then we have an eyewitness who saw them fake it at Cannon Air Force Base in 1968, who said so as he was dying. So we have four proofs that would
Yeah.
prove it in a court of law that they didn't go to the moon if people weren't so wrapped up in their emotions. I got a criticism after doing Joe Rogan that I'm anti science. Well, wait a minute. They're anti science because you can't have greater technology in the past and in the future. Von Braun said you cannot go to the moon in one rocket. It would take at least three rockets taller than the Empire State Building, weighing 800,000 tons each. The Saturn V only weighed 2,500 tons. That's a difference of 30,000% times three. And then Elon Musk said, you can't go to the moon in one rocket. You have to make 8 fuel trips minimum first, and then you can go. So that's anti science to claim they win in one rocket. These people have made a god out of putting a man on the moon. I mean, if you think about it, what is mankind's greatest accomplishment? Putting a man on the moon. What's science's greatest accomplishment? Putting a man on the moon. The problem is science has become propaganda business. Everybody has something to sell, whether it's a medicine to help you get better, it's a marketing job. The top manufacturer of medicine in the world spends more money on marketing than research and development. Everything is a sales
Yeah.
pitch, including cars, rockets, medicines, and everything else. So to stamp science on it is like stamping, certified by the Used Cars Salesman Association of America. Doesn't mean anything if you're realistic about it. So, and if I may conclude of my rant here, you talked about court corruption and so forth. I don't know anything about that. And I naively believe that maybe, courts were I don't know, the little bastion of honor and integrity left in the country. Apparently, I'm super naive about that. All of this has to do with the struggle between right and wrong, between light and darkness, between truth and lies. And how ironic that mankind's greatest accomplishment, putting a man on the moon, ends up being a lie. In a fallen world where our leaders lie continually, where governments lie continually. If I may add, Robert Kennedy Jr., who has more access to the JFK files than Oliver Stone, says his uncle was killed by the CIA. I think he would know. We have Robert McNamara, defense secretary during the Vietnam War, which America was against. And he went to the CIA and said, we need something like Pearl Harbor to get people behind us. So they contrived an attack of a ship of Vietnam origin on an American ship. And he admitted before he died, never happened. Congress passed a law to start the war based on an event that never happened. So they're willing to kill their president. They're willing to kill 58,220 of their own soldiers without reason. So I don't think they're going to have a problem faking a video image of the moon. So there you go. They did, I'm sorry to say, fake the moon missions. I went from believing in them to practically worshiping them, to moving on to doubts, to moving on after I saw that footage of them faking being halfway to the moon. What can I say? They did fake the moon landing. How ironic that the poster child of conspiracy theories, which is they faked the moon landing, ends up being true. And if that one is true, think about what else might be true.
Amazing. Thank you very much for that introduction, Matthew. You have a follow-up question because I have a ton here, so I'm taking notes.
Well, I actually had a thought, because what's interesting to me is when I was younger, I used to have, talk about worshiping the astronauts. I think Bart and I are probably very similar, but I had, a poster of Neil Armstrong in the bedroom, a poster of Farrah Fawcett Majors, and I really believed in it. But when I grew up, I realized it's a lie. And by analogy, when I was younger, I believed in the court system. I believed in truth, justice, and the American way. And now I feel largely cheated by the court system, that it's really not, I feel like it's all kind of phony baloney, just like the moon landing turned out to be. So that's kind of my personal, I just wanted to throw that comment in there, but that was my thought. So.
And if I may, actually, because we were trying to, to connect the dots here for the audience that we are blessed with. And by the way, thank you everybody for joining. I see great participation here. I'll put comments as they come by. But Mr. Sibrel, so what's your advice since you've been in this area of research, for so many years? How do you wake people up? Because what you described, right? You are saying that your perspective of court system is you mentioned the word naive, right? But Matthew and I, we are in that very deep into the cesspool that the court system is, in particular family court, and that's where the audience actually connects with us. Maybe I can connect it to one of the events that you became famous, partially for, right? When you were attacked by Buzz Aldrin, I think it was, right? And that investigation was closed, right? They found no wrongdoing, even though you clearly were assaulted. So that may be a glimpse into what many are dealing with. How do you actually bring people to that awareness level? Because I see comments here. Some people are very, very skeptical. to the point of becoming actually antagonistic, right? That's like what's the term? Despise before investigation. Based on your
Well, yeah,
experience,
I
is
mean
it possible?
that's proof in and of itself that I'm correct, because a sword with no point causes no injury. Why are people foaming at the mouth, giving me death threats simply because I said the moon missions are fake? There's a famous quote,
Mhm.
each chapter of my book at Sibrel.com, which is in audio that I read myself, Kindle and print. It has a quote at the end of each chapter. One says, the likelihood of one individual being right increases in direct proportion to the intensity to which others are trying to prove him wrong. If I walked on the moon and someone thought I didn't, I would find that hysterically funny. Really? You really think we shot it in a TV studio? You want me to swear in a Bible? Sure, I will. Would two make you feel better to three Bibles? But it's like I walk up to these astronauts in front of their wives and say, "Oh, your mistress says hello." They're mad because it's true. And the way that people can perceive this is up to themselves. They have to have a spirit that is willing to be wrong. I used to not only believe the moon missions were real, I used to practically worship them. I had a shrine in my house of multiple pictures that I moved from house to house every time I moved and saw these pictures thousands of times over many years, believing they were real. You have to have an open mind. I talked to a person who is both a doctor and a lawyer, and I was introduced as the guy who says we didn't go to the moon. He folds his arms and says, "Oh, I looked into that. We went to the moon for sure." Well, he looked into it by doing a Google search that says, "Of course we went." And he spent maybe 5 or 10 minutes on it. I've spent 35 years and maybe 50,000 hours looking into it, and went from being the biggest fan to the biggest critic. You see, if you believe in God, the Bible says God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And Jesus says, unless you can enter the kingdom of heaven like a child, you will by no means enter it. You see, so what is pride? Pride is my unwillingness to be wrong. I'm not willing to be wrong. I talked to a college professor teaching aerospace at one of America's most prestigious universities. He says there's nothing that would get him to recant the glorious moon landings. No proof at all. Nothing. And I said, well, what if you saw one of the Apollo astronauts tearfully confess on national TV that it was fake? It was filmed at Cannon Air Force Base, just like Bart Sibrel says. Would you admit it then? And he says, no, I'd still think he walked on the moon anyway. You see, he's choosing to ignore the facts because of the sweet candy. There, one of the quotes at the end of one chapter says, the bitterest truth is better than the sweetest lie. That's the heart we have to have. We have to be willing to be wrong. That guy who who is a doctor and a lawyer thinks he knows better than someone who spent thousands of hours and decades researching it. He thinks he knows better. And that college professor thinks he knows better than an Apollo astronaut because he said out of his own mouth, if an Apollo astronaut confessed before the world that the moon missions were fake, he'd still think he walked on the moon anyway. Can you believe that? So I'm sorry. If you really want to know the truth, you have to be willing to be wrong. And I was willing to be wrong. Fortunately, this idea caught me as a young man when I was open minded. Hopefully, I'm still open minded. I think the Sabbath is Saturday. Some people think it's Sunday. But if someone says it's Tuesday, I'd say, show me. You know, I'm willing to be wrong on something that I believe. I'm willing to be wrong. And so that's the attitude that we have to see the truth. Now, when you realize it, you have to understand I was given $1 million by a multimillionaire who builds rockets for NASA, who knows the moon missions are fake, who wishes to remain anonymous so his stock won't go down. Okay? Think about who that might be, right? And I was doing the film under the theory it might be true that they faked it. We had shadows intersecting at 90 degrees that should be parallel if they were lit by sunlight. Two of the three astronauts wouldn't give an interview about it unless the president asked them to. and the Soviets were so much more advanced than we were. You can't go back 50 years later. You can't even go more than 1,000th of the distance to the moon 50 years later. And I'm like, something doesn't smell right, but I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. And then 3.5 years into a 7-year project, I pop in a videotape from the first mission. It says, don't show to the public on the beginning of it. And it's unedited footage of a 1-foot model of allegedly the Earth floating in space, dated 2 days into the flight, where the crew of Apollo 11 is supposed to be halfway to the moon. The lights come up and they're faking being halfway to the moon, which means they can't go halfway, which means they didn't go. And they all have the same equipment. So if their equipment can't leave Earth orbit, none of them did. And it's the last mission that had the 90-degree intersecting shadow. So they never went. I'm sorry, that's just the way that it is. And when it dawned on me, when I'm looking at that footage of them faking being halfway to the moon and the lights come up, I'm like, oh my gosh, they really did fake the moon landing. Do you realize the faking of the moon landing is so much more profound historically than if they had actually gone? They either they went or they didn't. And if they really went to the moon, then why are there 100 going on 1,000 videos, websites, and articles to reassure stupid people that the moon missions are real? You see, there wouldn't be a need to prop it up unless it were made out of straw. And that's like me going around saying Mickey Mouse was the first president instead of George Washington. Do you really think there'd be 1,000 videos to reassure people? No, it's not Mickey Mouse. Here's why it was George Washington. Let me explain it to you. You see, there's something wrong here. And when it dawns on you, they really did fake it. And just go to Sibrel.com with an open mind, look at it, figure it out. You realize this is profound. This is so profound that the most powerful nation on earth, and potentially the most corrupt, really did fake the greatest accomplishment of mankind. And then it gets worse, because that film I made, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, you can see it for free at Sibrel.com on the homepage. I had a lot of information that I was asked not to put into the film to release after certain people died. It's in the book that just came out. I interviewed the family of the man who was going to be the first man to walk on the moon, who wouldn't cooperate with the fake moon landing fraud. And he was murdered by the CIA. Not my opinion, it's the opinion of his widow and his son, who's a 747 pilot. You understand this? Not only is the government faking the moon landing, they're murdering their own citizens to cover it up. This is really going on. I mean, come on. Robert McNamara said he started the Vietnam War on a fabrication that led to the death worldwide of 3 million people, including 58,220 of their own soldiers, that there was really no reason to start the war, and they ended up losing it anyway. So the government threw away 58,220 of their own soldiers on a fabrication in a war that they ended up losing anyway. And they killed their own president because he was going to shut down the CIA. So these people are at large. They did fake the moon landing. And when it dawns on you, like it belatedly did for me, I just quietly wept. I'm like, how sad. They really did. Now, the amazing thing is, if you have an open mind and realize, like I had to reluctantly admit, they really did fake the moon landing, you kind of wake up. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, wow. It's so profound that the most powerful nation on earth faked mankind's greatest accomplishment, murdered people to cover it up, and their own victims are defending their own deception. Do you understand that? We have people who are foaming at the mouth because I'm saying we didn't go to the moon, and they didn't go to the moon. So what they're really doing is they're defending their own criminals who are deceiving them and murdering their brethren and stealing their money. 35% of our income goes to the federal government, who uses it to fake moon landings and to pay the salaries of CIA agents who kill people trying to expose it. Then, of that 65% you have left, You have to spend it on local taxes, local sales tax, local gasoline tax, local property tax. If you're lucky, you have 50% of your income left. Okay, someone is taking half of my money? What is that all about? How did that happen? How did that become normal? You see? Well, it became normal because no one's doing anything about it. And we have corrupt presidents from both parties who are appointing corrupt leaders to every department in the government. And the rank and file may be honest, but when they try to pursue exposing a crime, they're told if you continue, you'll be fired or killed. So they back down. Why are people backing down? Well, here's my opinion. Back when the Boston Massacre happened, a massacre, 5 people were killed. They called that a massacre, right? Five people. They said, "That's it. That's it. We won't. We're not going to put up with this anymore." They said, "We're willing to die. My wife is willing to die. My children are willing to die. I'm willing for you to burn down my house and my wagon and kill my horses. I'm willing because what you're doing is wrong." People need to realize they're gonna die anyway. And if you read my book at Sibrel.com, you'll hear my admission. I turned down this project originally for fear it could be true, and if so, I could be risking my life exposing it. Why would I want to risk my life for what Nixon did 50 years ago? No, thank you. And then I changed my mind. I read the Bible. I'm not exactly a Christian at the time, but it did convince me there is right or wrong. There is a battle between good and evil, and judgment for how you live your life just seems kind of logical, doesn't it? What did Terminator 3, beautiful movie, say? I thought we stopped Judgment Day. And he said, no, you only postponed it. Judgment Day is inevitable, and our death is inevitable. And what if you're wrong about God? What if there's a judgment for how you live your life? So, what I had to realize was I'm going to die anyway. And if they faked the moon landing, I didn't know. I just said maybe. If they faked it, that's so much more significant than if they'd actually gone. And if it's true, the public should know what they did is wrong and it is worth dying for. So I changed my mind after 5 years go by, reading the Bible 5 times over 5 years. And this is why people are backing down to hold on to their job, to hold on to their money, to hold on to their house, to hold on to their car, which they're going to lose when they die anyway and face judgment. And even if there is not a God, do you really want to be remembered for all of history of being a coward? Right? If you do believe in God, second to the last chapter of the whole Bible, Revelation, I think chapter 21, relists for about the 400th time the type of unrepentant sins that if you keep doing them, you won't enter heaven. The very first of the list, before immorality, before thievery, before murder, is the cowardly will not enter the kingdom of heaven. The cowardly. Eisenhower warned us. Famous speech, January 19th, 1961. The deep state warning speech. But he was president for 8 years and did nothing about it that we know of. Warned us as he's going out the door. Good luck. Didn't want to risk his life. Wanted to retire with his grandchildren. Put 300 million lives at stake because of his selfish and cowardly behavior. Kennedy did something about it and died. Well, he went out in a blaze of glory, gonna die anyway, right? You see, Eisenhower should have done something about it for 8 years. The president of the United States, who was the general on D-Day in World War II, was afraid to risk his life for what is right. And now we're suffering because of it. People need to stand up. They need to realize they're going to die. And even if there were no God and no judgment day, do you want to be remembered for all of history of loving your house and your car and your money more than what is right, more than standing up to tyrants, right? We're at a critical hour here, right? We can't act leisurely while there's a bomb underneath the table. We need to talk about getting rid of it, doing something about it now before it's too late.
Wow, that's a profound segment. Thank you. You actually answered a couple of questions that I had, because it really we are facing a somewhat similar mission, waking people up, standing up to tyrants, the tyrants in court, tyrants who take children away. That's a horrible Holocaust that's going underneath the same table that people are not aware of. But the pandemic, the real pandemic, fatherlessness and taking children, breaking families, it's all done by the government in order to manufacture criminals and orphans, and then use them as fodder for the prison system, for the foster system, and we can only, some of us can already, imagine what is done to those children, runaways that are hundreds of thousands across the U.S., right? And that's all being fed in the first segment of that child trafficking chain that starts in family court. So we are facing, Matthew and I and many people, in the audience that we are blessed with, are facing similar issues. And the answer seems to be, from you is that, you need to trust God, right? You need to have belief that we all fulfill higher mission, and then just don't be afraid. So I know I don't need convincing. I'm Jewish. Shabbat is Saturday, right? So I have no question. But yeah, it's faith, right? And it's believing in higher power that actually gives you strength. So that was my question. Because you see the
I was
awakening.
thinking the other day there, Roman, if I may interject about, okay, the Jews say the coming of the Messiah will be the first time. The Christians say the coming of the Messiah will be the second time. I think when the Messiah comes, at that point, we'll just be glad that he's here. and and if the Christians are wrong and it's his first time, okay, but at least he's here. And if the Jews are wrong and it's the second time, well, okay, but at least he's here, right?
Yeah.
And so it'll be a glorious thing. It's interesting. The Jews and the Christians are they're first cousins. And from my point of view, sad to say, most Jews I know are better Christians than most Christians I know as far as morality, ethics, following the law of God. And it'll all be worked out. God is a God of mercy and grace. All he asks us to do is to repent. It's amazing. The man who confessed that he eyewitnessed the moon landing being filmed at Cannon Air Force Base in 1968 was the chief of security at the Air Force's Special Operations Base. And it's not in the book because his son was still alive. But now I disclose in interviews, this guy's dying and fearing the judgment of God. And the very first thing he confesses is that he's a murderer. His son is taken back. It's like, well, who did you kill? He says, well, I killed a coworker at Cannon Air Force Base in 1968. And the son is concerned that the family needs closure because did this guy just disappear? What happened? Because he's involved in spy type stuff. And so the military police come in to investigate while the son is watching. And they say, who did you kill? This person, when did you kill him this time? And then they asked, why? Why did you kill him? And he said, well, we both eyewitnessed them filming the moon landing on a fake lunar set. We were told if we, disclosed it, we would be killed. My coworker thought it was morally wrong. He was going to tell a reporter, and I killed him to keep the moon landing fraud a secret. And that's how we know where it was filmed, when it was filmed, and the code name. In fact, President Johnson showed up the first of 3 days of filming and gave my source a list of 15 VIPs who were allowed in to observe. We published that list in the book. Some of these people are still alive, and we verified 2 or 3 of them were at Cannon Air Force Base at the time. And so there it is. We have video footage of them faking part of the moon mission. We have shadows intersecting at 90 degrees that should be parallel if it were sunlight, not electrical light. We have the logic that you can't have greater technology in the past and in the future. And we have an eyewitness deathbed confession that courts consider to be twice as powerful as a regular eyewitness account. And he said, I saw them faking the moon landing. There you go. And this is something that people don't want to give up. You have all of this proof we didn't go to the moon, really much more proof than we really went. And yet it's difficult for people to see because it's this sweet, sweet emotional candy that they don't want to give up. They don't want to give up. I did an interview with a famous alleged conservative, alleged anti-corruption, personality. And in his mind, I know America has gotten bad, but at least we went to the moon. And then he had on an Apollo astronaut after me, kissing his feet like he's some hero when he's accomplished to multiple homicides. You see, it's so sad. You have a person who's pointing out conspiracy after conspiracy that the federal government has done, but they refuse to accept that they lied about the moon landing when it was the easiest one to lie about. Kennedy was killed on the ground in front of 200 people. The moon landing is a TV picture controlled by the federal government with no independent press coverage, no eyewitnesses. A little black and white TV image. People wanted to believe they're on the moon. They cried, they prayed, they waved their flag. And now that's the burned impression that they have, and they don't want to give it up. And these people who are, mad at me, they weren't even alive at the time, or maybe they were 2 years old at the time of the moon landing, but they grew up in science, academic, and that's the crowning achievement. How dare you say this glorious, glorious event? It's called Apollo after a Greek god of deception. And these people are worshiping Apollo. They really are. They're worshiping a god that's a false god. And there's the guy who built the rocket said it's impossible to go in one rocket. It's impossible. You don't have enough fuel. Elon Musk says you don't have enough fuel. A guy did a TED talk just a few months ago, said it may take 24 rockets to bring all the fuel necessary to put humans on the moon. And they call me anti-science. We have one of the clips at Sibrel.com saying that the technology to protect astronauts from radiation on the way to the moon, that technology has not been invented yet. Then how did they go to the moon? And they're calling me anti-science. They're the ones who are warped with their emotions and pride. Pride is the unwillingness to admit that they're wrong. You see?
Yes.
What can I do? I mean, they feel compelled to make these long videos, 45-minute videos, going over every point, reassuring people that the moon missions are real. Why do they care what idiots think? Why are they spending so much time, so much money, so much resources, so much effort? Because of a bunch of idiots who think we didn't go to the moon. I mean, why bother? You see? Because it's a god to them. I've insulted their god. And they have to prop up their god before it falls over.
That's the answer, to why people are clinging to that, cult essentially, right? The other question is, why government did that, right? And my preliminary answer is that they try to hide God. If there's one unifying theme to all of that, right, is that they try in a sense to defy biblical cosmology. If you follow the Bible, right, as we just mentioned, we don't want to probably veer too much into that direction, just to keep the conversation focused. And thank you again. But there's a firmament, right? If you follow the Bible, so maybe that's the Van Allen belt.
Yes.
So I have a question, based on that, since you were so much awakened on that front that you are waking up others. What is your stance on other major conspiracies, you want to call them, or just part of reality that the humanity is just now researching or waking up to, like the shape of the Earth, or what went here 2 years ago with this whole pandemic. What's your stance of that, if you can share?
Well, believe it or not, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I remember hearing about chemtrails like 10, 12 years ago and rolling my eyes. Oh, not another one. Give me a break. And then I went through a phase where I woke up about an hour before sunrise for like 6 months. And I went out on my balcony, nowhere near the airport, and there's a grid in the sky just finishing up under cloud of darkness. And, when you exhale outside in winter, the vapor dissipates pretty fast. And a condensation trail out of a jet, it disappears really quickly. If you follow an actual jet aircraft that's commercial, yeah, there's a trail behind it, but, it dissipates very fast. This is a grid, a literal grid. Lines horizontally, lines vertically, and they widen and they widen and they widen and they fill in the gaps. Next thing you know, the cloud cover is this blanket cloud. I remember going over the horizon a few years back and I saw these big puffy clouds. And I realized I haven't seen big puffy clouds in a long time. All I've seen is a clear sky or this carpet over the entire sky. And then meteorologists said, hey, we've discovered two more kinds of clouds. I think the textbooks about the type of clouds, I think there's five different kinds, have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. And over the last few years, they suddenly discovered two new types of clouds. Yeah, because they're man made. My father was in the Air Force. He told me he worked on weather modification. That was in the 1970s. Imagine what they're doing now. So I had to, go from being a skeptic to realizing I guess that's true too. And this little thing that we went through for the last 3 years, I assumed if I took a medicine for blood pressure, it would lower my blood pressure. I assumed if I took medicine for a headache, it would get rid of the headache. Who would think it wouldn't do what it would do? The idea that it would do something else never entered my mind. My opinion about such things, whether it's the moon landing, this little thing for the last 3 years, or who shot JFK, it's simply the opinion of the experts. I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't know anything about medicine. Don't know anything about weather modification. Don't know anything about rocket travel. So I have to do the research. And I do a lot of research. The Bible says in the Old Testament, the Tanakh, many advisors, and you can't go wrong. So if the dead man's nephew says Kennedy was killed by the CIA, I trust his opinion. And if a former vice president of 10 years of a certain company selling a certain medicine says, number one, there's no reason to take it. And number two, it's not good for you. And number three, I guess they just want to use it as a tool for lowering the number of people on the earth. And then I take it to the next step. Why are they doing that now? And if you listen to Janet Napolitano's retirement speech, remember Eisenhower's retirement speech? Homeland Security Director, when she resigned, said a natural disaster is on its way, the likes of which the United States has never before seen. There's some clues there. What the government is getting ready for, maybe with this thing for the last 3 years, is a natural disaster that's never happened in the history of America. Well, we've been around for what, 248 years, something like that. And we've had hurricanes, volcanoes, earthquakes, and you can't predict those in advance. This is a natural disaster that's never happened in America that you could predict in advance. The only thing that comes to mind is a cosmic event, like a comet or an asteroid or a rogue planet. I just released a book at Sibrel.com about rogue planets. And I believe a cosmic event is coming. That's what she said. It's a natural disaster. That's a cosmic event. It's never happened in the history of America. That's a cosmic event. And it's a natural disaster you can predict years in advance. That's a cosmic event because of the geometry, see, and the trajectory of these heavenly objects. You can't predict a volcano, earthquake, hurricane years in advance, but a comet or an asteroid or a passing rogue planet, you definitely could. So it's my opinion that they're lowering the number of people on the earth right now to get ready for that event so that large numbers of people won't die all at once. They're kind of doing a controlled burn. The rich people who run the world need butlers and cooks and chauffeurs and pilots. So they don't want to shock society too much. They want to, if possible, lower the number of people now. And who did phase one of a certain medicine target? All the people that are on Hitler's useless eaters list, the elderly, the diabetic, the obese, right? And that's congratulations, you're in phase one. Phase one was Hitler's useless eaters list. Did nobody notice that? Those are the people they're trying to get rid of, who are sucking, resources off of insurance and not paying a big premium, right? They want people to pay a premium and not take advantage of the services. Those people are taking advantage of the services, right? They can save money if those people aren't around anymore. Are there people who are homicidal, genocidal maniacs? Well, yes. The people who run the world in the entire history of the world have never, ever had the best interest of the people in mind. Never. More people were killed through genocide in the last 100 years than in 6,000 years of history before that. Do you realize that? Why do we think our current world leaders are any different? I mean, they cheered the astronauts. They gave them medals of honor for being such good liars. And people are defending world leaders who lie all the time. They promise before they're elected, I swear I will not make this medicine mandatory for employees of the government. As soon as they're elected, they make it mandatory for employees of the government. Shouldn't there be a law that says if a politician makes a promise and breaks it, they should be thrown in jail and out of office immediately? Wouldn't that be a good law? You see, we have the foxes in charge of the henhouse. They're writing all these laws that make their crimes legal. How nice is that?
Mr. Sibrel, there's a question that the audience is asking, and I have in mind. Do you have an opinion on what I just put as a comment here, the shape of the Earth?
Well, I think it's a sphere.
Okay.
I've traveled halfway around the world and am introduced as the Moon Man, and they're like, "Well, what's the movie about? The moon landing's being fake." First thing out of their mouth, halfway around the world, is, "Oh, you think the Earth is flat?" When Bill Casey, NASA employee, published a book in 1972 saying the moon missions are fake, they said, "Oh, he thinks the Earth is flat." When my film came out, a funny thing happened on the way to the moon. They say, "Oh, you think the Earth is flat." When my book came out, "Oh, you think the Earth is flat." I asked my flat Earth friends, "Send me everything you got." I'm an open-minded. What do I know? You know, I haven't been to outer space. Maybe it is flat. I don't know. So I said, "Send me the best. Send me the best of the best of the best to convince me." Not convinced in the slightest. In fact, there was a guy 2,000 years ago put a stick in the ground 500 miles away, and from the difference in the shadows at noontime was able to discern the circumference of the Earth within about 500 miles. It's pretty good. And, back then. And so I think the Earth is a sphere. I think all the biblical, references are just metaphorical. Just like in Psalm of Songs, he says, "Your eyes are diamonds, your lips are rubies." Are eyes really made of diamonds? So people are describing things from their point of view. And secondly, it doesn't matter. If the Earth were a cube or sphere or flat, it doesn't change anything. It doesn't change right or wrong. It doesn't change the liars who run our government. It doesn't change the fact that they faked the moon landing. When President Clinton was asked why he had the affair after he said he didn't 20 times, he said, "Because I could. Because I could get away with it." That's why they faked the moon landing. Because they killed Kennedy, got away with it. They did the Gulf of Tonkin, they got away with it, and they faked the moon landing because they could. Because they're that arrogant. They're a bunch of gangsters who run our country and our world. They kill people who get in their way. Right? I don't know anything about Trump. I don't take sides. I took myself off of voter registration. Voting is useless. It's useless. You're better
That I
off.
think we all can agree. Yes.
Yeah. But the point is, they do kill people who get in their way. There was a guy who leaked that it was a plan for Hillary Clinton to be the nominee, not Bernie Sanders. Do you realize Bernie Sanders got twice as many votes as she did, but she got twice as many delegates anyway? They said, well, those are just the rules of the Democratic Party. Shouldn't that be illegal? I mean, come on, why is that not illegal? And then the guy who leaked the information gets investigated by the FBI instead of the corruption that he leaked. And then he ends up dead from a robbery where the robber forgot to take the money from his wallet. I guess he was distracted. Well, this is just the way the world works. And what can you do? I think we need to pray for divine intervention, and we need to be willing to die for what is right. People in the government need to come forward and expose these criminals. We outnumber them. That's why they're trying to lower the number of people on the earth, right? We outnumber them, and they will flee. What the Apollo astronauts should have done at their first press conference, and really only joint press conference, is just said, "Look, we didn't go. They threatened to kill me and my family. I asked for the police to surround my house right now." What would have happened? All those scoundrels who did it would have ran and left the country, right? That's what would have happened. The truth exposes everything, and causes the criminals to run away. That's why they lie, to cover up their crimes. Expose the truth, they will flee, right? That's what will happen. And yet people are afraid. They're afraid when they're going to die anyway. That's what I had to realize. I'm going to die anyway. So I might as well die for what is right.
Thank you. I know that you have limited time that you could dedicate to the show. You know, we would certainly love to have you again because I still have a lot of questions that you know your opinion would be very interesting. Matthew, I don't want to cut any questions that you had. I just had another one that if I may just answer, you know, ask you to answer. Um, why other countries participate in that? You know, because that's a question that people say. For example, I think the head of Roscosmos, the Russian space agency, very recently came out saying that no, Americans landed on the moon. You know, it kind of suggests that
Well,
there's something.
actually, the
Mhm,
opposite of that is true. The former
mhm.
director of Roscosmos, Dmitry Rogojin, said the moon missions were fake.
Rogozin, yeah. I'm a
Yeah,
native
he,
Russian
he
speaker, so
said
you
he
know.
said the moon missions were fake. And the next day after he says that, nationwide makes the news. The former Russian space director says the moon missions are fake. The next day, I get a call from Fox News saying we're going to do an hour-long special about the moon landings, whether they're real or not. And then they say, we haven't read your book, we haven't seen your films, we haven't done any investigation, and irregardless of what we find, we will conclude the moon missions are real. That was the point of their program, to put out the fire of the Russian space director saying the moon missions are fake. And then in their program, they quote one Russian scientist from 1969 who said, congratulations, as proof that the Russians think we went to the moon. They didn't quote the former space director who said 6 weeks earlier that the moon missions were fake. And this is Fox News, allegedly, anti deep state. If that were true, they wouldn't have fired Tucker Carlson. Now, would they have? So if you go to Sibrel.com, you'll see Vladimir Putin at an AI conference in November. In November, they had an international AI conference where Google showed off the most advanced AI in the world, multiple AIs hooked up in a neural network. And someone fed it pictures from probes, unmanned, from China, from the surface of the moon, through its special deepfake detector program that has never been wrong, said the pictures are real. Then it fed them pictures from the Apollo mission, says fake, 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 fake. So the smartest computer in the world just said the moon missions are fake. And Vladimir Putin was there, didn't look surprised at all, looked scared because they're blackmailing the United States. If the truth comes out, they won't be able to blackmail him anymore. I know someone who works for the Chinese Space Agency. There's an interview of that on my YouTube channel. Just go to Sibrel.com, click on the link at the bottom. And he says everybody here knows the moon missions are fake and that they're blackmailing NASA for space technology in exchange for not blowing the whistle. That's what they're doing. They know, of course they know, but rather than blurting it out and making the information then, you know, not valuable, they blackmail. That's a better use of the information. And the idea that because the moon mission involved 400,000 people, if you include secretaries and food vendors, do you really think the CIA is so stupid to tell the person making the glove or the boot or the door handle, hey, we really didn't go to the moon? Be sure not to tell anybody. Bank of America has 400,000 bank tellers. Do you think a bank teller knows about corruption in the bank at the same level that the CEO knows? You see, there's only three eyewitnesses. The flight director, Eugene Krantz, who I spoke to, said even someone in the command center at Houston Control can tell no difference whatsoever between a simulation and a quote real flight. It's just a bunch of numbers going by on a screen. If they can't tell a difference and they're in the heart of NASA, how can the public tell a difference watching it on TV in their living room? And we already have them killing their own president. We already have them faking a war that killed 58,220 of their own soldiers without reason. They're not going to have a problem faking a video image. Trust me. And we have to be willing to be wrong. And I know this is a positive lie. It's sweet candy. People don't want to give up, but they did fake it. And when you realize that's the case, and this is why they're so concerned. I showed this footage of them faking being halfway to the moon. Again, it's in my film. A funny thing happened on the way to the moon. You can watch it for free on the homepage of Sibrel.com. I showed it to two NBC news directors who agreed it proved that they didn't go to the moon. One was afraid to broadcast it for fear it would cause a civil war. He said if America finds out that they faked the moon landing, that's different than finding out a different person killed Kennedy or someone else did 9/11. They said this will enrage them. That's why they're constantly putting up these defenses of, we really went to the moon. You can't find, you would think it would make world news that the smartest AI in the world just said the moon missions are fake. I mean, either Google's 10-year of research and development, billion-dollar investment just made a piece of junk. Just, they don't know what they're doing, or the moon missions are fake. And if you go, I have a screenshot of it on Sibrel.com in the video, the YouTube video. If you find the original link, it says if you proceed to see the truth that the AI just said the moon missions are fake, it warns you all your data will be stolen and you'll be associated with child pornography. That's how desperate they are to show that the moon missions are fake. They're so desperate because I didn't see it at the time. When the NBC news director said this will cause a civil war, I'm like, you're overreacting. Now I wonder, you see, he saw something. This is different. This is burned on people's hearts. If they find out the government lied about the moon landings, they will never trust the federal government ever again. That's what they're afraid of. This is the linchpin. This is the finger out of the dike, you see. Maybe we should pray for the truth to come out. Wouldn't that be a glorious day? I think it would be. It would wake people up and they would go, oh, things aren't what they appear. Maybe God will do it as a last warning to mankind. That's my prayer.
Wow.
Thank you so much.
And if I may interrupt you, I just have to say we are so happy to have you here, and it's so mesmerizing to hear you speak. We are so grateful. The part that really convinced me when I saw the movie A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon is the window shot. And the window shot for me is it just seals the deal. They basically have turned off all the lights inside of the spacecraft, and they're filming a circular porthole looking affair. And because they're in low Earth orbit, when you're looking at the well, you want to explain it to people, if you wanted to explain it.
Well, the film explains it to people, and there's a clip also that goes into a little bit greater detail, one of the clips of the book. Just go to Sibrel.com, watch A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon for free on the homepage, or go to the Moon Man video links, and it's the one that's called Smoking Gun. And this is what convinced me. I mean, they're faking being halfway to the moon. That's what they're doing from Earth orbit, dated 2 days into the flight. So if they're faking being halfway to the moon, it means they can't go halfway. They can't leave Earth orbit. And what a surprise, 55 years later, they still can't leave Earth orbit with a human. NASA says they haven't invented that technology yet. That's why there's mannequins orbiting the moon. Don't you find it odd? They can leisurely play golf and drive cars on the moon with 1960s technology, but 55 years later, they can only have mannequins orbit the moon. You don't find that suspicious that they've postponed returning to the moon 10 times? They have had 50 years of development to return to the moon that somehow they did in 8 years when they've never done it before, never even been in outer space before. With 1960s technology, it only took 8 years, but with 50 years better technology, it takes 50 years and counting, and they still can't go back because they never went in the first place. You see, that's just as simple as it is. And what can you do? The world is fallen, and mankind's greatest accomplishment is a lie. And like you said, the window shot, that's what convinced me. I'm like, oh my gosh, they really did fake. I'm seeing it in front of my eyes. 2 NBC news directors said it proves they didn't go to the moon. My greatest critic says it is them faking being halfway to the moon, which they would never have to do if they really went.
Yeah. And I think just as importantly, on it must have been July 17th, 18th, and 19th, when they're filming the Earth as they're flying to the moon, the apparent size of the Earth would have changed, but it's the size of the porthole in every instance. Anyways, it's just the window shot really is what convinced me. And I think also looking back, they didn't have any GPS back in during the Apollo era, because GPS didn't come into any kind of use until probably 1974. And so I think it would be impossible, even if we didn't have the window shot, I think it'd be impossible to pull off the feat of going there, even if you had lead shielding in the capsule, even if you had enough rockets and enough fuel, you would still have the problems of not having GPS. But those are
Well,
some
yeah,
of my
one way of
thoughts
looking at
anyway.
it is the South Pole has 100-degree below zero temperature, has 100-mile-per-hour winds, and there are bases there. Why? That's pretty rough conditions, isn't it? Because it can be done. Maybe barely, but it can be done. So it is done. If you could go to the moon, there would be bases there, just like at the South Pole. I mean, why would anyone want to be at the South Pole anyway? But they can, so they do. If you could go to the moon, there would be bases there. It's pretty simple. You know what I mean? You can't have greater technology in the past and in the future. That's just the case.
Yes.
And so the fact that they can only go 1,000th as far 50 years later, come on, people. I don't know what more proof that you need. And shadows intersecting at 90 degrees and footage of them faking being halfway to the moon, and an eyewitness who, as he's dying, confessed they faked it at Cannon Air Force Base. What can you do? They faked it. That's the world we live in. And if the poster child of conspiracy theories, they faked the moon landing, is true, imagine what else is true.
Oh,
Yeah.
a lot of things are coming. That's apocalypse, right? That's the reveal of the truth. That's what we're living through.
That's right.
Yeah. Mr. Bart Sibrel, we want to be respectful of the time, right, Matthew? Hope to have you back. I have a lot of other questions. Couldn't bring up all the questions that the audience is asking. So if you are amenable to that, we'll welcome you at any point. But
Okay.
yeah, we're on over an hour here, and I think that's the time to part. Again, thank you very much. It's a pleasure and very, very interesting to have you here. You're the #1 researcher on the topic, so thank you for joining.
No problem. Take care.
Thank you.
And thank you so much. Thank you.
Oh, no problem.
Thank you.
God bless.
Thank you. God bless indeed.